Hi guys! In this video, I'm going to discuss pubic stress fractures. Now, I did a previous video about sacral stress fractures as well, which kind of goes together because it's all in the pelvis. But in this one, we're going to look at who typically gets a pubic stress fracture. We're going to look at what it feels like, the signs and symptoms that can tell you that you may have to get it looked at. Then what type of investigations is the best to confirm the diagnosis. And we're going to look at the causes. So what things other than your training and stuff can cause it, and also how do you treat it? What factors do you have to take into consideration? And obviously also, how can you prevent it from happening again? So those of you who don't know me, my name is Maryke. I'm one of the physiotherapists from sportsinjuryphysio.com, where you can get online physiotherapy assessment as well as treatment for your sports injuries. So have a look at our description of this video if you want a link to our website. Okay, so pubic Ramus stress fractures. The pubic bone is that bone that you can feel right here at the front of your, I may as well just show you. So pubic bone sits right there. That's where you're pressing it. Superior ramus is there. Inferior ramus, you're going to have to go right in there to feel the bony bit there. That's the inferior ramus. So you can get a stress fracture in either of those parts. Now, remember also that stress fractures comes in different stages. So initially, we call them a stress reaction. So that's just where the bone is really struggling to recover from all the training and stuff you're doing, where it's not actually fractured yet. And then it progresses through different stages to the point where it actually does fracture and sometimes even shifts. So who typically gets this? It's typically people who does a large volume of exercise. So distance runners, army recruits. I'm not sure about jumping sports. I think that's more the sacral one that gets that more often. But any sport can technically give it if you do a lot of it. Now, why do you develop it? It's an overload injury. So it means that, remember, when we do exercise, our body gets micro damage in all the parts, including the bones. But that's normal. It's by repairing that micro damage that the body grows stronger. The problem comes in with if that micro damage cannot repair because you're either training just too often, so it doesn't have a chance to repair itself, so it's accumulating and becomes macro damage, or it doesn't actually have enough nutrients and things to repair it with. So for instance, a big cause of stress fractures is when athletes don't eat enough energy to replace what they've burned. So if you're starving the body, technically, you are giving it food, but just not enough, then it's going to shut down. It's going to shut down those processes because it can't repair all of it. So then the bone becomes injured. Also, it may be because you're lacking key vitamins and things like vitamin D, for instance. You cannot absorb calcium, which is one of the biggest building blocks of bones, if you don't have enough vitamin D. So that vitamin D deficiency is a big thing to watch. Certain hormone dysfunctions, like for instance, when thyroid hormones, so it can be genetically that your thyroid hormone is not doing what it, or being secreted as it should, and that can affect your bones. Then also, so we've spoken about not eating enough to replace the energy that you burn when you're training, but also people with eating disorders where actually they don't eat at all, so anorexia or things like that, that can have the same effect. Now, what does it feel like when you have a stress fracture there? So the first thing is you'll have groin pain to some extent, depending on how the groin pain can differ quite a lot. It can be just a dull ache, or it can be quite sharp even. But the key is that you have to have tenderness on the bone. So either on that superior ramus, or if you go in there, it has to be tender on the bone when you feel there. If it's tender on the muscle, it may likely just be adductor tendinopathy because it's very much in the same area. Usually, if somebody with a stress fracture or stress reaction stands on one leg, just balances on one leg, it can vary from either sharp pain that they have to come off it immediately, or the pain can just build, or it can just be a mild ache. But if you have an adductor tendinopathy, it doesn't really hurt usually when you just balance on one leg. So that's one way that you can start thinking, maybe there's a bone issue here. What else? Yep, obviously, running is usually uncomfortable. So most of the cases that was described in the research either people started feeling pain during a run and it usually built, or it was after a run that they started getting an ache, but it gradually increased as they continued to run. Session after session, the pain would increase until they couldn't run anymore because it was too much. In cases where it's a proper fracture, where it's actually fractured, it may be really painful to walk and weight bear, so people may need to use some crutches. In cases where it's just a stress reaction in the bone, they may be able to walk okay, that walking doesn't really affect them that much. It's just high impact activities like jumping and running. Now, the best way to confirm that you do have a stress reaction or a stress fracture is not through X-ray. X-ray only picks up if there's a proper break in the bone, or that the stress fracture has been there for a long time. The research has shown that a lot of these stress fractures get missed if you only do X-rays. So MRI scans are better because they can pick up the stress reaction in the bone as well, even if there's not a complete fracture involved. So you cannot really rule out a stress reaction or stress fracture if you haven't had an MRI scan. But of course, not all groin pain means that you've got a stress fracture in your groin. There are other things that can feel very similar, like for instance, adductor tendinopathy can cause the same pain. And to be honest, I've seen people with pubic fractures who had adductor tendinopathy and even abdominal tendinopathy together with a stress fracture. Because by the time that the bone has worked that hard that it's actually broken down, often the tendons and things that attaches around that area has also been affected. So it's possible to just have a pure stress fracture or a pure tendinopathy without the other, but it's also possible to have a combination. So if something's not reacting to treatment as you expect it should, like an adductor tendinopathy or something, then you need to think further whether you need to scan more for stress fractures as well. But the big thing with a stress fracture versus a tendinopathy of the adductors is that the stress fracture has pain on the bone when you palpate it, whereas when you've got an adductor tendinopathy, it's on the tendon that it's painful, or maybe where it attaches into the bone, but it's not the bone itself that's painful. Now, okay, so you can have associated pain with it, that we've said in the MRI. Okay, so what's the healing time? How long does it take to recover from these? Now, in the research, it's anything from 8 weeks to 28 weeks. So what's 28 weeks? 7 months. So there's quite a variable range there. And the interesting thing there was that it didn't depend on how much pain the person had at the beginning. So some of the guys who took 28 weeks to recover fully just had a lot of aching going on there, whilst others who had really sharp pain recovered within 8 weeks. So pain is not a good indication of how long your recovery process will take. It will essentially take as long as it takes. And that's why it's useful to work with somebody who can help guide you to know what the steps are to go through. So what is the treatment for this? Now, the most important thing, or not the most important, but a really important thing is do not use non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medication. So anti-inflammatory medication is typically things like naproxen, ibuprofen, that type of thing, Voltaren. Do not use that if you have a stress fracture or a stress reaction in your bones, because it's actually been shown to stop bone healing. You can discuss with your GP, but because I'm not a medical doctor, so I can't tell you what's safe for you, but it may be a better option to just take paracetamol, because that doesn't actually affect bone health. But you have to check with your doctor before you stop or take any medication. Then second, the most important thing for this condition really is to offload it to an extent that the bone can actually start to recover. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't do anything. You can be as active as possible within the limits of discomfort. So for some people, if it has a proper fracture, it may mean that you need crutches for a couple of weeks until you can walk pain-free without them. For others, if you can walk pain-free, it may mean that you can cycle. You just can't run, or you can swim or run in the swimming pool. So it's all about finding what is the strength of that area. What can it cope with that doesn't make it feel worse, but allows you to stay active. Then as you recover, obviously, you have to start loading it, but you have to go through the stages. And it's really important always to check that you don't get pain during the activity or as a result of the activity. Now, a very important thing that goes with that treatment of load management is you have to identify the cause. Now, if it was pure overtraining, nothing else contributed to that, then yep, it's just absolutely load management and rehab exercises that's for you. However, if nutrition played a role, make sure that you address your nutrition. So if you're somebody who, if it's just that you didn't eat enough for how much you were training, but you don't have disordered eating, then you may just want to chat with a nutritionist to find out how can you optimize your eating patterns in the future to not run into this trouble again. But if you're somebody who naturally restricts your diet, or you're worried about gaining weight because you've now got an injury, you really need to speak to a nutritionist as well. Because if you're going to restrict your energy intake while you're trying to recover from this injury, you may not recover that quickly or at all, because you're still not giving your body enough nutrients. It needs the right nutrients and enough energy to actually recover the bone or heal the bones. Definitely check vitamin D levels. If you've been diagnosed with a stress fracture, have your bloods done by your doctor. It's easy and it can tell you whether you're actually vitamin D deficient. If you live in a country where you don't really see the sun during the winter months and you tend to put sunblock on when you go outside, or you don't really train in direct sunlight, then there's a chance that you may be vitamin D deficient. And if you don't have enough vitamin D, you'll be slow to heal, or your fracture may not heal properly. Strength training. So strength training is important because the pelvis is an area where a lot of force goes through. And usually you will see this type of stress fracture that there's other things involved as well, like an adductor tendinopathy or maybe a abdominal tendinopathy or something like that. But again, it's important to choose your strength training exercises well so that it doesn't aggravate the fracture, and that you progress it over time, so that you start with easy, light things, and as you grow stronger and the fracture heals, that you make sure you strengthen your muscles properly to be ready for the running you want to do. And that kind of ties in with, if you have been diagnosed with other stuff like tendinopathies, make sure you treat them in the meantime so that you end up recovering from everything before you go back to your running. And then a really important step, because it's so easy when you're injured to just kind of be annoyed with life and wait for everything to be better, not think about it again. But use every injury to learn from, because you don't want to be in this position again. So think about, where could you have done better? Should you have looked after your training schedule better? Was it that you didn't have enough periodization in your training year? Too much high intensity maybe? Is there something in nutrition that you should look out for in the future? Is there something to do with the winter time that you're not getting enough vitamin D, so you need to start taking supplements during the winter time to prevent this happening again? So make sure that you figure out why this happened, and also that you're quite sure about how you can prevent this from happening in the future. Okay, so to summarize that, not all groin pain means that you've got a stress fracture there. It's only if you've done high volumes of sport, or you have some bone conditions, but it has to be tender on the bone. And X-ray is not a good examination for this. You have to have an MRI scan to rule out or rule in a stress fracture or stress reaction. Most important thing to get rid of it is to offload to an extent that doesn't cause pain, but then reload gradually and look at the other things that could have contributed to it, so that you address all of those things at the same time. Excellent. Hope that was useful. And remember, if you need more help with an injury, you're welcome to consult one of us via video call. The link to the website is in the description of this video. Take care.